a song on one of the best soundtracks of the 80s and one of the best soundtracks of all time actually inspired this movie. That story and more next. Hi, welcome to Retroflix. This is your channel for retrospectives on movies and television. Today we're going to look at a 80s classic movie and a classic soundtrack it has that came about because of a song. Now usually movies are made and then songs are made, put in a soundtrack, songs are made of the movie, but this happened actually opposite. Now this is not unprecedented. For example, the movie Convoy from 1977 was based off the 1975 song of the same name by C.W. McCall. But it doesn't happen all that often. But this was such an iconic movie, still is today, and the soundtrack is iconic as well. The movie that we're going to look at today is Pretty in Pink in 1986. Pretty in Pink is written by John Hughes, and it stars Molly Ringwald, Jon Cryer, and Andrew McCarthy, just to name a few. And we'll talk about them here in a little bit, and I'll also talk here in a little bit about, I'm going to wait till the end to kind of talk to you about how this came about with that song. To give you a little bit of a summary of this movie, Molly Ringwald plays Andy, and Andy is an outcast in her Chicago high school, hanging out with either her boss that she works at from the record store she works at, or her quirky classmate Ducky. And Ducky is played by Jon Cryer, and Ducky has a crush on her. Then one of their popular rich kids, played by Andrew McCarthy, his name is Blaine, asks her out. And to her, this seems to be too good to be true. Now, Andy doesn't come from a very wealthy family at all. In fact, her father really struggles, her family really struggles economically. And Andy begins to fall for Blaine, but realizes that dating somebody from not only a different social class, but different economic class is not easy at all. Now let's look at the cast a little bit more in detail. Again, as I said there, Andy is played by Molly Ringwald. This role was specifically written for Molly Ringwald, and we'll talk about this and of course how this movie came about through the song. We'll talk about that a little bit later, so that'll get cleared up a little bit. You know, John Hughes and Molly Ringwald really knew each other from the movies Breakfast Club and 16 Candles, so they had a really good rapport. The character of Ducky, that was played by Jon Cryer. Jon Cryer was very prominent in the 80s in a lot of movies there. And he would later become probably best known for the sitcom 2.5 Men, where he played Alan Harper. And then Blaine was Andrew McCarthy. Now, Andrew McCarthy, this is an interesting story, was not who they wanted, the movie makers. They wanted Charlie Sheen because they looked at somebody like more athletic and maybe more, you know, strong-jawed, and they were looking at Charlie Sheen for this role, but Molly Ringwald said, that's not the type of guy I'm attracted to. And so if it's going to be a love interest, you know, I want somebody that the type of guy that I really like. And she looked at Andrew McCarthy as more the type that she liked, and liked his performance in St. Elmo's Fire as well. So she went to the movie makers and said, that's who I want, and she got what she wanted. Of course, she was the driver of this movie for the most part, so she got that. She got Andrew McCarthy for that role. And interestingly enough, when they were shooting the movie, they had the director told Andrew McCarthy that Molly Ringwald liked him, had a crush on him, and then told Molly Ringwald that Andrew McCarthy had a crush on her. Now, she did have a crush on Andrew McCarthy, but Andrew McCarthy didn't have a crush on her, but it still worked. The ending of this movie was tested. The ending that was shot initially was tested, and the test audience did not like it. Studio wanted to basically rewrite this ending and rewrite it and reshoot it. In fact, Andrew McCarthy was doing a play at the time. Everything had already wrapped. Andrew McCarthy went off to do a play, and for that play, he had to lose weight and shave his head, which he did. When they were called back to reshoot, Andrew McCarthy actually, and you could see noticeably he's thinner, but he's wearing a wig. So if you've ever seen this movie or watch it again, check the last scene out. That's Andrew McCarthy wearing a wig. Now, I don't want to ruin anything anything for anybody out there that may not have seen this, or maybe you haven't seen it for a long time and forget how things end. So I want you to go and watch this. So I'm not going to tell you what the original, what the ending they ended up doing was. I don't want to ruin anything, but I'll just leave it at that. What is really, even for myself, I really like this movie. Of course, I was about 9th grade at the time, and all these, Molly Ringwald, Jon Cryer, Andrew McCarthy, the Judd Nelsons, all them, any movies that they were in, we were watching back at that time in the 80s. But the one thing that really got me with this movie was the soundtrack. The soundtrack was just epic, and it's still looked at today as one of the best ever. And if you look at, in fact, even Rolling Stone and the Huffington Post still calls this soundtrack a masterpiece of modern cinema. And in keeping with his previous movies, John Hughes incorporated a lot of new wave music, which was huge at the time. And a lot of these bands came from the new romantic period, especially in Britain, in the early 80s, and then kind of went into the new wave as you went more in the later early 80s and the mid 80s, which was huge at this time. And of course, MTV was really getting these bands and these songs out as well, and became a really big medium to get them a lot of popularity. So John Hughes had been using that kind of music for his movies up to this point, and so he continued doing that. And again, this was off the charts. Some of the songs, and I'm going to start here with the one. This is now what I started with, as far as how this movie came about. Okay, first one I'm going to talk about here is Pretty in Pink. Pretty in Pink is a song by the Psychedelic Furs. Now, Molly Ringwald really liked this song and this band, and she went to John Hughes and said, we need to make a movie of this song. Because you listen to the lyrics, this would be a perfect way to make a movie out of this. And John Hughes is such a prolific writer that he was able to do that pretty without hesitation. Of course, the studio didn't really like the ending, but still, it was really well done. And that's how this movie came about, as we started at the beginning of this video today, as to a song that created a movie. And that's what it was, Pretty in Pink by Psychedelic Furs. And it was Molly Ringwald really liking this song and thinking these lyrics would make a good movie. And then that's how it started, and John Hughes wrote it. Another song is called Left of Center. This is by Suzanne Vega with Joe Jackson. And then there's Shell Shock, that was performed by New Order. Great new wave band. And Wouldn't It Be Good was a song by Nick Kershaw, but in the movie is performed by the Danny Hutton Hitters. Next, another song that is in this soundtrack is Bring On the Dancing Horses by Echo and the Bunnymen. Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want by the Smiths. Do What You Do by INXS. And last but certainly not least is a song that actually ended up really stealing the show for the soundtrack and became the signature song, and that was If You Leave by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD as they're commonly referred to. OMD wrote another song for the original ending that we talked about that was test screen and wasn't liked, and they rewrote and reshot. They'd actually wrote another song for that ending. So when they were rewriting it, they were going to rewrite it and reshoot it, they were asked to make another song. And they came back and said, we are touring in 2 days. And so, but they relented and did it, and they wrote this song in 24 hours. And so just amazing, and it was just such a great song. Again, it really stole the show in the soundtrack. Even as a single, If You Leave would go on to be #1 in the US Hot 100. And I actually remember myself, I would listen to Casey Kasem's Top 40, every week, and then I taped this song and I would listen to it over and over and over again and pretend like I'm singing it to a girl I had a crush on at the time. So, now I'll admit that. So just an epic soundtrack of obviously 80s, but it still today resonates. And as the 80s have really came back over the last several years, this soundtrack and these songs certainly have, no doubt about it. I still hear a lot of these on the radio nowadays. The box office, it was at approximately 41 million on a $9 million budget. It was 22nd in year-end gross in 1986. And if you ever want to watch this, and I hope you do, because it is a really classic part of the 80s. And again, the soundtrack that you hear in this is just phenomenal. You can get the, if you have a subscription, you can get it on HBO Max. And for rent, you can get it on Prime, Redbox, Apple TV, or Vudu. That's a little bit about Pretty in Pink of 1986. Again, go out and watch this if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, tell us what you think about it. Or if you have to go back and watch it again, please do so. If you haven't seen this movie, come back and comment. Tell us what you thought of it. Let's get dialogue going here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these movies. And of course, even with this movie, the soundtrack, because the soundtrack is so iconic in this movie. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, that's a wrap.